For people who don't know, I'm a very big Blindwave fan. The first video I ever watched was probably their Hard Home reaction, or basically those early like season 5 Game of Thrones reactions. That was a very long time ago. But I looked it up, and back then apparently they had roughly 10,000 subs, roughly. So they were a very small channel. And looking back in retrospect, I thought they were pretty big back then, because 10,000 is a big number. But comparing them to my number, like 2.5k roughly, comparing them to Kyle Entertainment's number, who is currently in this voice channel, of almost 10k, they were incredibly small back then, and I just didn't realize. So I just wanted to look at basically Blindwave and see why I think they succeeded. I think it's interesting. So
what if it's all luck, Alinari?
I don't think, I mean, yeah, obviously some part of it is luck, but I also don't think it is. I have 5 points why I think Blindwave succeeded in the early days. I would say probably all of these are very obvious. You could probably even guess what they are. Obviously, they're a reaction channel, right? So they're quick to cover very popular media. I think that's like an eternal thing where there'll always be a new show that people are interested in. So in the early days, in order to like attract an audience without having an established identity, they just needed to latch on to existing popular things and insert themselves into it, right? Secondly, I think their passion and sincerity is very obvious. And I think it's especially obvious in their discussions, where they're very passionate and they're very sincere in the things they're saying. There's no irony. I think the sincerity and passion is important, especially when they were a small channel and they had to attract people who wanted to hear their thoughts on things. So passion and sincerity. Number 3, I think they're undoubtedly funny and entertaining. I remember early on, I actually thought about this because I got into a point like very early on where I was like, why am I watching someone react to something when I can just watch the original thing? It feels like I'm just sitting here when other people like across the universe are just laughing at something, and I'm like, they just laugh, that's crazy. And I was like, why do I watch them? And then I thought about it, and I realized that I watch them because they're funny. They're funny, they have a good dynamic, they've known each other for a long time. They're just entertaining to watch basically on their own, even in the discussions after the reaction. Now, as an extension of this, I think Eric, which is one of the Blindwave members, is...
Eric Whiteley? I know
there is no Blindwave without Eric, especially in those early days. I think Eric is a very good and engaging speaker. When he says things, it's interesting. I think he's a very good storyteller. Whenever he tells a story, I'm very engaged. And I also think that Shane, back in the day, was a very engaging storyteller. I think storytelling is also a big part of like why Blindwave is so interesting, especially in their discussions. Yeah, Eric is very important, especially at the beginning of every video. It usually was Eric who was leading the discussion or leading the introduction, where he'd give like a context to what they're reacting to. He'd like ask the other members like, oh, what's your experience with like this series we're watching, whatever. Eric was very important to that, I think. Having a very definitive personality who was very consistently there to speak on the content that they're reacting to. That's an important thing. Number 4 out of 5 is, this is, I think, the most important. They had large community acknowledgement and interaction. I think the Blindwave community was a big driver for their success, especially I guess when it came to monetary success and actually doing this full time, because they had a massive Patreon immediately, and I completely doubted it. They were a tiny channel. I never thought that they would get so popular so quickly on Patreon. Anyway, number 1, I guess like I have a few sub things related to like community acknowledgement interaction, was their viewer gift unboxing, which is what created a bunch of like inside jokes and well-known like members of the community. They basically had a PO box in their description or in their channel somewhere, and then people would like randomly send them stuff, but eventually too many people sent them stuff, so they had to create like this weekly series basically where it was called Mailbag, and they would basically unbox all the stuff they got from their community.
Don't get me wrong, it's awesome, we like that people send us stuff. Let's get a little crazy!
Now from this, I don't know if anyone will recognize these names, but there were some names that even now, like off the top of my head, I remember. There's like Michael, basically he was like an oiler where he would like feed them so much money and like really expensive stuff. There was Not That Michael, who was like a meme based on, there was actually the original Michael who was sending them stuff, and there was Not That Michael, who's like the person who's not Michael, who's also sending them stuff. There was people like Katie, who I think she eventually became like a mod of their like Discord, or I don't think she's like an editor or anything, but she became like a big part of the community, but she was there early on sending stuff. Fat Man Chad, Dababa, I don't know if like Dababa's like a family member of like Aaron or something, but I know early on she was at least a community member. Basically, there were these big names that were very well known in the community for people who were watching. In our case, for instance, there would be names like Miller or Minty or Heath and stuff like that, right? Like names that constantly come up when you're talking about things in your content. I think that was very important for making people feel like they can be heard if they leave a comment on the content. That was interesting. I also talked about the inside jokes, like there's zip strips when you're actually doing stuff. Like Calvin would be like, oh my god, zip strip, crazy. There would be slap bets, which is like a common thing in Blindwave, which has become less frequent these days. There were memes like that in the actual content. They would refer to the commenters in their discussions. So it would be like naming actually people who are leaving comments on their videos and actually calling them out and talking them in their discussions so they feel heard and would want to come back and see if in future videos they're also referenced. That's also interesting. I think there was also like yearly events to look forward to. For instance, the Christmas unboxing, which is like an extension of the Blindwave mailbag, where every year you could look forward to a particular specially themed like kind of episode of their series where you would like sit down and unbox Christmas stuff. This is all, I think, like community building stuff, which is really interesting and important to fostering like a very dedicated small community. Obviously, again, like the consistent upload is, I think, very important, like covering popular media quickly and also doing it consistently and having like a video every day so that you can build kind of a parasocial connection where every day at like 11 p.m. you look forward to the next Blindwave video and you're like, oh, what is Eric going to think about this? And then you like leave a comment and then like maybe they'll acknowledge the comment in the next video. And it feels like, because it's so consistent and at the same time every day, it kind of feels very parasocial and very like they are building a community that way. I think that's interesting. And for me, I guess the one example is the early Dragon Ball Z Abridged episodes, where I think it was when they moved to their new channel after they had like copyright issues with their old one, they did basically a daily Dragon Ball Z Abridged series, and I would look forward to it. I'd be like, oh my god, it's like at 12 a.m. Let me like go to the Blindwave channel and check it out. And then they'd watch it. It wasn't much of a video. It was only like 5 or 6 minutes long, I think, like each reaction, whatever the actual length of the episode was. But I was invested. I was very excited. I would keep Blindwave in the back of my mind every day so that I could actually watch them. So consistency is very important. I think building a community is good, or it was good for them, because it also led to improvements in their content. Now, the two examples I have is that in early mailbags, because viewers were invested, they liked Blindwave, they wanted to see them get better, they would mail them better camera equipment and lighting and stuff like that, and that would further like improve the actual Blindwave content. So it was like a win-win where they get to get featured on the actual channel, and also Blindwave gets to make better videos because of them. So that was really interesting. And another example is their Discord server, which is obviously a big part of the Blindwave community these days, which I'm not involved in, but I probably should get involved in to understand it better. That was originally made by Rob.
About 2 years ago, I created the Blindwave server as a solution to a simple problem. Aaron and Calvin wanted to talk to viewers while they played games with them on stream,
which was one of the fans of the Blindwave channel, and it just grew from there. So I think community building is important. Yeah, it's interesting and it's also important. Now, the final point about why I think Blindwave succeeded is that they gradually improved their video quality over time. I think if these days, if their videos were the same quality as they were back in the day, where they weren't talking as much, their reactions were kind of boring, their quality of the actual video and audio was not as good, I don't think they would have succeeded. I think it's because they constantly tried to make better videos as well. Anyway, that's my giant rant about why I think Blindwave is what Blindwave succeeded in the early days. Kyle, what do you think?
I think we went down to 5 viewers.